We have two readings this morning from great African American voices. The first, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., from Strength to Love, very short. When I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm not speaking of that force which is just emotional bosh. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door, which leads to ultimate reality. And this is very adapted from several pages from her Bell Hooks's book, All About Love, which is a really wonderful text. Bell Hooks, who definitely spelled her name with lowercase letters on purpose, was an African-American cultural critic, radical feminist, and intellectual dissident. And we lost her on December 15th of 2021. It was a great loss. She writes, I think that part of what a culture of domination has done is raise romantic relationship up as the single most important bond, when of course the single most important bond is that of community. Everyone I know is at times brought low by feelings of depression and despair about the state of the world. Whether it is the ongoing worldwide presence of violence expressed by the persistence of man-made war, hunger and starvation, the day-to-day reality of violence, the presence of life-threatening diseases that cause the unexpected deaths of friends, comrades, and loved ones, there is much that brings everyone to the brink of despair. Experiencing the sacred in our everyday lives and remaining open to love is crucial to our survival. A commitment to spiritual life necessarily means we embrace the eternal principle that love is all, is everything, our true destiny. Here end the readings.
In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, sorrow falling down like rain, I await the sun again. I choose love. I choose love.
It's good to be together with you again. I had a week in a warm climate, the island of Aruba, where one day we pulled over to explore the beautiful, austere, and dangerous to humans landscape of the desert. As I picked my way down the path, avoiding cactus barbs and broken glass, I thought, this is a perfect background for the beginning of Lent, that time in the Christian liturgical calendar that begins with Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, feasting and partying, and continues for 40 days leading up to Easter. Easter's going to be real early this year, if you're thinking, what? Yeah. Lent is a time for sober contemplation, sobriety, and for people who observe it, refraining from some kind of indulgence or pleasure. They might give up eating meat or shopping, or they might choose to swap kind of an aimless kind of behavior like scrolling on their phones with a more intentional focus on something spiritually nourishing, like reading sacred literature or poetry. I have 2 Lenten commitments this year. My usual one is to refrain from shopping online and avoiding Amazon. The other one is new this year, and it is to bear witness every day to what is happening in Gaza, to the conflict between Israel's government and the Palestinian people, and to protest it in some way, to protest what the Israeli government is doing and my own government is supporting. This is a personal opinion. This is not to speak for the congregation. I am very aware there are multiple thoughts and opinions among us about this situation. I'm just sharing my own struggle with this. I don't do this witnessing in a spirit of hope anymore. I have no hope for a ceasefire, even as I join the many voices calling for one. But I'm doing this in a spirit of lamentation and despair, especially as a person whose own family, all my extended family, European family, was killed in the Holocaust. And we are those for whom the state of Israel was supposed to represent safety, joy, freedom, and Jewish survival. As I keep my attention on Gaza, and now especially the city of Rafah, I ask myself, often in desperation, how can humans live together in the spirit of love? When? How? Really? How? And in asking that, I try to figure out, what do we mean by love? We say it all the time here in church. We sing about it in songs. That anthem was particularly beautiful. We say it in prayers. I say it in sermons. We say it in readings. We know love is the foundation of all that is life-giving and good. And we know how essential love is to coping with all the trials that we suffer along our human path. But what is it really? And where are there communities that are even remotely close to living it? We just had Valentine's Day. And so I'll begin with Bell Hooks's observation that love is preeminently thought of in our culture as an emotional and romantic experience between two people. Being in love means to turn toward your object of desire, cherishing them, making a commitment to them. We picture pretty couples dressed in white on their wedding day. And this leading oftentimes to the welcoming of another human being into that unit, who then becomes the locus of love, the child, the children. And those patterns are repeated unto generations. This kind of love, again, is a turning inward in devotion to one or a few. And this love, at its best, ennobles individuals and prepares us all for a loving life. One can lead a beautiful life centered on this kind of love. And while it creates beauty for perhaps the immediate circle of affection, it is also possible to live this way, never knowing or touching lives outside of one's own garden walls. So when we invoke love in the religious sense, which is always what we're doing here, we're invoking a love that beckons us turn outward, outside our garden walls. We are invoking agape love, which is a Greek term for a love that is broader than romantic love. It is an all-inclusive love. Agape love is kind of a flinging of our passion equally upon people known and not known to us, a devotion generously extended toward the world, toward creation itself, all living beings, and the beaches, and the environment, and so on. It's a love that I think of as simply a response to being alive. The wanting we feel in agape love, and eros, by the way, which is the root word for erotic. Eros love is that romantic, inward turning love. The wanting that we feel in experiencing agape is not for the individual beloved, but for the beloved others, for whom we, as lovers, wish all flourishing and fulfillment. This is the love that the universalist tradition has always claimed that God has for all of us. And this is also the claim of all the mystics of all the traditions. The old universalists used to speak of God's irresistible love. I love that phrase. It means that you cannot actually resist it and avoid it even if you try. Because this is the kind of love that says, not, I do love you, based on sort of who you are or how you look or how sexy or fabulous you are. This is a kind of love that claims, in all caps, I will love you, based on your mere being. This is a humbling love. It is a searing love. Perhaps it's not the love that rules our world because it's just as hard to receive as it is to give. Think about how you feel in your body, or just feel that for a moment. If I say, or I will love you. And this is from the heart of creation itself. I love you, I will love you. How does that feel? Can you accept that? I know I have a hard time with it. Well, I got to do something to earn that. I will love you. It has taken me many years to acknowledge that agape love is too demanding, too frightening, and countercultural for most of us to practice. So humbling. It's a beautiful idea, but when it comes down to it, fear very often has more power over us than love. We see this all the time. Hey, you know what? You threaten me or my loved ones, there goes my concern for your flourishing. Are your children's flourishing? I reserve my love for my kin, my intimates, my clan, my group. Fear rears up, guns and bombs come out. The bodies of children testify to fear's dominance. Annie Dillard said that we should all wear crash helmets to church because the truth that we encounter here is so dangerous. Let's look at love and fear squarely. What does it really mean to trust love's power when fear is hissing in our ears, in our minds, on the news? What would that kind of love really require of us, of politicians, of leaders, of organizations, of you and me? Jesus of Nazareth gave a teaching that you've all heard. We must love our neighbors as ourselves. So when Jesus said this, an onlooker inquired, well, okay, who's my neighbor? And Jesus responded, as he often did, by telling a story. Such a pain, right? He can't just give a quick answer. He has to tell a big, complicated, confusing story. In this case, he responded with the parable of the Good Samaritan, which you may recall is a story about a man who saw someone beaten up by the side of a dangerous road that runs between Jerusalem and Jericho. And he stopped to help him. Now, the shock in this story, for those hearing it in Jesus' time, would not have been just that supposedly righteous men, moral leaders, walked by the guy and totally blew him off, ignored him, but that the hero of this story was a Samaritan. And the Samaritans and the Jews were enemies. Let me say that again. The Samaritan belonged to an enemy group to the Jews of Jesus' community, those to whom he was speaking. So Jesus was highlighting not so much basic decency and, when you see somebody, you should help them. That's not just it. He was also saying that, the people you think of as scum could be the ones more likely to live out of love than you and your moral leaders are. How about them apples? It was a zinger. It still is. And I don't want to hear it. I also don't want to think about praying for my enemies. I just want to keep my enemies at a distance. So we have these greatest hits of Jesus of Nazareth, but they're really, really seriously difficult and much more complicated than they look at first. Martin Luther King Jr. preached a memorable sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan and pondered all of these teachings deeply as a Christian leader. He based his civil rights leadership and ethic of nonviolence on these teachings, and not only on them, he was also greatly influenced by the Hindu Mohandas Gandhi's organizing principle of nonviolence in India. Both of these men organized according to an ethic of love. And you know what happened? They both made massive contributions to liberation in their respective societies, and they both got killed. Strength to love also means courage to put your life at risk. Agape love, which Martin said was the supreme unifying principle of life, is not rooted in safety. It's rooted in sacrifice. It's not rooted in comfort. It's rooted in challenge. It is a thorn in the side that says, again in words attributed to Dr. King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And then I think about Cornel West, another important Black leader, saying, justice is what love looks like in public. Again, contemplating this in the context of savage violence and revenge cycles being played out in the Middle East, I begin to realize that it's not just that there are different forms of love. I get that. But what I hadn't really gotten was that sometimes those different forms of love actually contradict each other. No wonder I'm confused. The first love I ever knew was the kind of love a child has for their parents, for her parents or caregivers, for those friendly and dear and known faces that come close and provide all those babies' needs, warmth, food, comfort, protection, a bath, bows in the hair, little dresses. Eros and philia love, brotherly love as it is based on that knowing, intimacy, to be in that loving circle of embrace. And that is the deepest immediate love we ever experience. So I ask, at what point do the parents, the baby, or any of us figure out that these intimate forms of love should be preparation and a grounding and a foundation for the bigger love that bids us step outside the comfort circle, step beyond the familiar known faces, leave the family dinner table, and move into the world to yearn and work sincerely for all the goodness we should wish for ourselves and that should be available for all others. See, I think that intimate eros philia love should be preparation, not the final resting place where we locate all our love. But it's hard. Bell Hooks wrote, much as I enjoy popular New Age commentary on love, I'm often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to love, the practice of love within the context of community. A commitment to spiritual life requires us to do more than read a good book or go on a restful retreat. It requires conscious practice, a willingness to unite the way we think with the way we act. And again, I go back to King's expression of frustration about essentially the same thing. When I talk about love, I'm not talking about emotional bosh, which I don't remember that phrase. I think a lot of those copies of that reading delete that line because it's kind of less dignified than you think of King as being, emotional bosh. Both King and Hooks, speaking from their African American experience, did not have the time or patience to focus their lives on forms of love that are about sweet feelings for those close to their hearts. They understood that love must be a commitment on behalf of collective liberation, or else it is too small to really matter, to accomplish enough. In a world where the forces of fear, hatred, racism, denial, and violence are perpetually present and must be actively battled. Hard stuff to hear. Notice that even the metaphors we use for activating the power of transforming love can often be militaristic. And here I'm quoting from Paul's letter, to the first Christian communities. Put on the armor of God. Brandish the sword of the Spirit. I will stop here out of respect for all that cannot adequately be expressed about the kind of love we are called to cultivate as a faith community. I only know that it is deep, that it is mysterious, and that it is serious and challenging. Perhaps it is enough to say for now that it would be a good practice for the season of Lent to pause whenever we invoke love and to consider what we really mean by it, how gracefully we accept it, and to consider how we may be misunderstanding it or minimizing it. And above all, to reflect on how much more magnificent and demanding are its dimensions than what we may have ever allowed ourselves to imagine. May we keep on until we find it. Amen.